Wonderful. Ladies and gentlemen, and everybody else joining us today, I'd like to welcome you to our day 4 of our COP28 daily briefing, hosted between the Democratic Environmental Caucus of Florida and Democrats abroad. Oh boy, it looks, at least from the news, that there is some action. Typically on the weekends, COP never really does a lot. There's mostly just this time for interactions, discussions, the networking processes. But apparently today was Climate and Health Day at COP. We have a bunch of folks who've got boots on the ground over in Dubai right now. So we're going to go ahead and immediately go to them to see how they're feeling about their health, about climate's health, about the health in general. So, Dana, I'm going to pass it to you immediately. What have you been seeing on the ground at the Climate and Health Day at COP28?
Well, this is the first time that health and climate have been linked and addressed as a theme day at one of the COPs. It's been very interesting, and there's been a lot of enthusiasm about it. We have been looking at finance of health systems because, of course, climate disasters affect people's health. I've also been looking today at a number of sessions that are addressing early warning systems, which are being disseminated around the world in countries, so that when storms come, when floods come, when fires come, they are able to warn the citizens and avoid catastrophic health consequences. We saw that also in Hawaii recently, in Maui, that there were massive fires and the citizens were not warned adequately. So I think it's an important issue for us to discuss today, and I'm very pleased that the COP conference has now drawn a acute focus to this issue.
I agree, Dana, and it seems like COP28 would be one of the best ways to shout that alarm system and to get that alarm system set up and going. As probably many of you know, climate change is going to cause issues with regard to food security, with regard to health security, and it's going to be very, very fast and immediate when we start experiencing these issues. So the fact that COP28 is interested in hosting a day with regard to climate and health is extraordinarily nice, I think. John, do you have anything to weigh in here with regard to Climate and Health Day at COP28?
Well, I'm here in the Rotary Pavilion. It's their first time participating in the UN Climate Conference. So, very interesting pavilion and discussions going on here. Many of the folks may not be aware, but health is a big priority of Rotary International. It's one of the largest civic groups in the world, extremely large in the United States, very prominent in my community. And internationally, they focus on polio eradication. They take on the polio issue as far as vaccinations, and also they stress water and sanitation in developing countries. And actually, that's how I became involved in Rotary International, or more actively engaged as a Rotarian years ago, delivering clean water systems. Fouled water, contaminated water is one of the biggest drivers of infant mortality and mortality among young children globally. So delivering clean water is an essential step in improving the health of a nation, of a community. And then sanitation, of course, wastewater, a major transmission agent for a number of diseases around the world. So Rotary is heavily involved in health and had some conversations on that today. And looking forward to talking a little bit about some of the roundtables we had here at the Rotary and some of the other pavilions that I visited.
Yeah, it's honestly great to see that Rotary is having a presence at COP finally. I think you and I both have attended, and shout out to LaBelle, Florida for their Rotarian group. I was a part of them for many years. Yes, like I think 16 to 19 years old. Wonderful, wonderful group of folks down there. And it's really good to see that Rotary is stepping in. I do know that their eradication or attempts to eradicate polio have been remarkably successful in all the times that they've attempted to go and administer the vaccines across the globe. So they're stepping into something like the COP events and climate change, I think, is a logical next step in order to prevent other major diseases from scaling up unnecessarily due to climate change issues. Other major headlines today, before we get into any of those roundtable discussions, it seems like a lot of tension continues to be had at COP28 with regard to fossil fuels. The COP28 president has said multiple times on today, on December 3rd, that there's no science behind the demands to phase out fossil fuels. And this also comes as, again, Secretary General Antonio Guterres consistently goes and hammers, tries to hammer them home about, yes, there's plenty of science about phasing out fossil fuels. And then ExxonMobil CEO jumping into saying that COP28 should focus on reducing emissions, not phasing out fossil fuels. So it's actually quite interesting to see these dynamics play out between the hosts of COP28, Sultan Abu Jaber, and then the actual rest of the scientific community who are consistently reminding them that there's probably every single tad bit of scientific evidence to suggest phasing out fossil fuels is the biggest priority that we can be focusing on right now at the COP events. But I would like to go into more of a discussion about the fact that it's 2023. We are sitting a legitimate 8 years after the Paris Climate Accords, when every nation across the globe came together and signed that remarkable treaty admitting that not only does climate change exist, but it's extraordinarily important that we do everything possible to limit warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. 8 years after Paris, and we're still having these discussions on whether or not phasing out fossil fuels is a necessity, which triggers, I think, two important points. And the first point is the actual location for COP28 this year that kind of made this a very logical argument for the UAE and for these major oil producing countries who see this as perhaps a way to showcase why fossil fuels should not be phased out as much as possible, but also how the UAE is shaping these discussions in general, trying to manage and trigger these discussions in a way they see fit. So I think we'll go first to Dana, if you have anything to weigh in here on this extraordinarily tenuous topic at COP28.
Well, I think we can all agree that it's been a contentious and even dangerous precedent that they have set in hosting Al Jaber, who is the president of the largest oil company in the UAE. They would, of course, like to continue production, but I think the world is recognizing that this is a necessity. We are in the midst of an energy transition, but as I said yesterday, with the upstart of renewable energy, we're just adding more energy, and we haven't yet peaked or started reducing our fossil fuel consumption, and that has to happen now. And one way for that to happen is if the world stops subsidizing this fossil fuel industry, and doing it now, that we stop building new infrastructure. It was a great great announcement yesterday when Rick Scott and John Kerry, Rick Duke and the deputy to John Kerry, and John Kerry announced new methane restrictions with the Environmental Protection Agency in the United States, that oil wells will be, and fracking, that there will be some control on flaring, that there will be more emphasis on reducing methane, which doesn't last as long in the atmosphere, but it is far more potent in terms of raising greenhouse gases. Something has to be done first through policy, then through implementation. It must start with the United States, because where the United States leads, the rest of the world does follow. But it's going to mean pressure on countries like the UAE and Saudi Arabia and other oil producing countries to not only begin tapering down their production, but to look very carefully at how they produce and what kind of methane is released as they produce.
I agree, Dana. Where the US leads, the rest of the world often follows. I think there have been many discussions since Paris, especially after Donald Trump became president, which suggested that the US was not qualified to lead those discussions anymore, given our election of individuals such as Donald Trump and the rest of the Republican Party who consistently deny that either climate change exists or that it does exist, and that their solutions for fixing these problems are just off the wall crazy. Uh, which it's good to see that Vice President Kamala Harris is still presently over at COP28, still trying to showcase that this point that Dana made, that the U.S. does need to lead these discussions as much as possible. And nations like the UAE and Sultan Abu Jaber will continue to suggest that fossil fuels are incredibly important as long as the U.S. isn't fully committed to this discussion in a sense that we will not be pushing fossil fuels as our main driver for our economy. We won't be pushing those subsidies as well. And I'd now like to move it over to John. If you have any thoughts on this discussion with regard to what's happening over there, how UAE is consistently defending the use of fossil fuels and consistently saying that science doesn't play as large of a role, or that the science supports that fossil fuels can play a role in a world during and post climate change.
Well, the point that Dana made about subsidies is central, particularly within our domestic politics within the United States. All of the incentives that we develop for renewable energies are basically simply offsetting the subsidies for fossil fuels. So until the subsidies for renewables reaches the level of subsidies for fossil fuels, you're not even getting above zero. So before you start establishing subsidies for renewables, it's most logical to remove the subsidies for fossil fuels. But of course, that's a political matter that Democrats often have as much difficulty with as some Republicans. Republicans are, more extreme on this issue, but Democrats are extremely sensitive to the business community and have not taken any dramatic action to eliminate these subsidies. And that needs to be a priority for the party, in my opinion. Once you eliminate those subsidies, the incentives that you've provided for renewable energies become, an order of magnitude more effective. So it's very important to get rid of those. As far as eliminating fossil fuels completely, it goes back to the profit motive. How much of the product's revenue is the industry willing to assign to offsetting their greenhouse gas emissions? It can be done, but it takes a distinct, a very deterministic fraction of their production to do that. It may take 20% of their energy. It may take 40% of their energy. It may take 50% of their product to undo the negative effects via greenhouse gas emissions generated by the burning of these fuels. It's highly unlikely that the fossil fuel industry would be interested in allocating that much of their production to offsetting their externalities, particularly in an environment where the renewable energy, the costs of renewable energies are consistently declining year after year. And that's true of solar, that's true of wind, that's probably going to be true of geothermal and other renewable energy sources. So it's a good concept. It may be effective in greenwashing the issue, but I'm not so sure that it would be a practical effect. In other words, that they would be willing to, the industry would be willing to allocate a significant fraction of their production to removal of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere.
It would seem that that discussion ought to be a priority prior to us attempting to figure out when we level off the use of fossil fuels and finally remove it from our system entirely. How much of that discussion are you seeing at COP, if any, with regard to how fossil fuel industry divests some of their energy production into those forms of future planning?
Well, they're talking in platitudes right now. They're talking in concepts. They're not talking hard numbers. they're in a position to talk hard numbers at any given point. The current level of technology determines how much of their product would be required to offset their emissions. But they don't talk about that. As an engineer, you can state the concept and then immediately you need to start discussing the numbers. But that's not what they're doing. They're hovering around in platitudes.
And I think we always seem to have a discussion around carbon accounting as one of the major metrics through which that we can discuss those truly hard numbers, whether or not we're talking about agriculture or oil production, carbon sequestration. An international standard for carbon accounting seems like the first logical step as to what one of these COP conferences ought to be setting out to achieve. If there's any discussion about the use of a carbon accounting metric or standard, that would be really nice to have somebody like that on the program, and hopefully we can find someone like that in the next few days. I will now.
Well, actually,
yeah.
I actually encountered someone with exactly that expertise, as well as in the material science area. So hopefully this fellow, Stephen Savarese, a Frenchman whose company is called Technocarbon, and he deals in solar and nuclear, as well as the accounting and some of the materials that go into fabricating the solar. And he's done some very innovative work, and I think we can have an interview with him.
That would be wonderful to have somebody like that on the program.
Have you been hearing much, John, about carbon capture? And I have been hearing discussions from folks from the UAE that this is, we can go on producing as many fossil fuels and burning them because we're going to have this technology to capture that carbon. We won't be adding to the carbon in the atmosphere and to global warming. I think that's we need to develop this technology. Hopefully 20, 30 years down the line, it will be more advanced. But I think this is a pipe dream for many of these fossil fuel industry workers to be pushing that.
I think you're right. Companies, corporations fight tooth and nail to defend every single percentage point of their profit margin. I cannot see one of these companies willingly allocating 10, 20, 30% of their productivity to this direction. Now, when an oil producer talks about carbon capture being a viable alternative or viable option to allow them to continue to produce oil and allow us as Western consumers to burn it, they may be simply not talking about them doing that, them at the wellhead, in effect. As the oil comes out, part of it goes off to market, part of it goes off to the carbon sequester to drive the carbon sequestration industrial process. They may be simply saying, well, we'll continue to sell the oil to you, and as you burn it, you're going to have to invest in the carbon capture, not us, the oil producers. So that's the conversation you need to have even before you start debating the percentage of the product that will be allocated to this.
But part of the Inflation Reduction Act are funds that are set aside for the development of these types of technologies.
Well, we better be investing huge amounts of money in carbon removal technologies. Not necessarily deploying them now, but going through the scientific and engineering iteration cycles to make it more efficient, to get it down from 50% of the fossil fuel energy to 40% to 30% to 20%. And you can do that. Science can pull rabbits out of a hat and be very creative in how they approach this. But you cannot simply have your initial technology and then throw huge amounts of money into scaling up that premature technology, because then all you're doing is you're squandering your resources that could go into improvements through research and development.
Exactly.
Next, I'd like to turn our segment over to our very own Michael Fidler. Michael, as always, is going to showcase to you what it must feel like to have your boots actually on the ground over in the UAE in Dubai. So, Michael, What's been going on in the photography realm? What do you got for us today?
When it comes to photography, COP is real fun. I can tell you that it's really fun. And I take every day 500, 600 images, and then it's very hard to choose the right images for this evening session because I could just talk about the photos for the whole hour, which I guess you will not allow. So I have just just pick maybe 30 or so images, and let me flip through them so you get an idea uh, how it looks like when it comes to photography here. I took this image, the first one. I took it on the very first day when I was just scouting the area. And I like the architecture. It just amazed me how many wonderful and architecturally unique buildings are here. And I did not know what is this building about? What is it? Actually, I sit in front of it right now, and I was curious, so I walked in today, and it is an exhibition, if you would say, called Passage of Water. It's a huge building, and the exhibition itself is relatively small. That surprised me. What is the exhibition is about comparing images, say from NASA or from International Space Center of the very same area, comparing how the specific area looked like, say, 10 years ago or 20 years ago, and show the difference comparing today. So you walk in, it's a pretty long wall. You wouldn't expect that for an exhibition. It's probably 100 or 150 meters walk before you actually get in there. And once you are in, there is some very high-tech exhibition. It's almost a 3D space. It's like a circle, and you can look all the way around you. You get a mouse and some other equipment, and you can play with the equipment. I think it's powered by Google and NASA together, and it's really fun to play with it. Since it's passage of water, it's related to rainwater, to water. And when I was there, it was specifically related to rainwater. On the downside, I would say that the exhibition or the topic was fairly easy. The facts that they were showcasing there seemed to me fairly easy for such a exhibition. Now, when it comes to the technology, I have seen several of these booths powered by Google AI, and it made me thinking that artificial intelligence, AI, might be very useful for fighting climate change. I will need to check more on this because I use AI quite often, but I never really use it in the context of a climate change. And I think there is definitely some potential in this area as well. Now, as usually, I just walked through a few pavilions just to get an idea. And when I stepped into Malaysia, there was a huge delegation with this gentleman on the left-hand side. I did not really know who he was. I just took a photo and went away. I think I went to Turkey and did not really bother to learn who he was. But I went to Turkey, and he came to Turkey 2 minutes after me, again with a huge crowd. And I still didn't know who he was. So I asked the photographer next to me who he is. And the response was, I don't know. I asked another freelance photographer. He didn't know either. I asked the third one. He did not know either. Only the fourth photographer actually knew who he was photographing. So this gentleman is a chairman of the Islamic Development Bank. And that's the situation here. Here are so many important people, chairmen, prime ministers, ministers, and so on, that you get confused who you actually meet. Sometimes you also meet a person that you know. So this is the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres going to one of his sessions, and I think he was a chairman of this specific session in the plenary. So you meet these people that you also know who they are. Before coming COP this morning, I checked the news and I saw several images taken with the white background. And I still haven't found the space because I went to the various plenaries and pavilions, and I could not find where is the space with this white background where all the prime ministers and presidents where they gather and they have their photos taken. Today, I was able to get in. It's next to one of the plenaries, and I could walk through the alley with all of these wonderful flags. And this is how it looks like. That's where the prime ministers and presidents, where they hang out. And this is how it would look again when some of the delegations come in. Then I was stopped by some organizer and I was asked if I want to get a ticket to an exhibit or to an event. And I said, of course, please give me a ticket. And I walked in to this Al-Baha Theater. And I have to say, I was amazed by that space was simply, visually, it was amazing. I don't like to say wow, but this was really a wow space. It looked like in a fairy tale. It was changing the colors. It was all the screens were everywhere on all sides, 360 degrees around you on the COP. It felt amazing. And I knew that something was going to happen. When I asked what will be the program about, they did not know. They just gave me the ticket and said, get in and you will see. I walked in and the gentleman on the right-hand side is some security guy. And at that point, I knew there will be someone very important showing up. So I stick around for a while and then the show started. At first, there was some artistic presentation. And it was the second time today when I said, wow, because it was huge. It was changing the colors. It had a great audio and visually it was just stunning. This is, I think it's a panoramic image. And if you looked around, well, it was amazing. It kept changing. And here are just a few more images from that area. And when I'm in the presentation, I usually don't clap, but once this presentation ended, this artistic presentation ended, I had to clap. It was just amazing. And then I took few images of the people who were actually in, and I was aiming for the gentleman in the middle because I was told that that's the president of the United Arab Emirates, Mohammed bin Zayed. But when I looked properly on this image, the gentleman on the right-hand side is Bill Gates. Then I only realized, yeah, that's actually Bill Gates. And then I got a few close-up shots of Bill Gates. And the reason why, what they were doing there, they were basically having a bridging session for the Reaching the Last Mile Forum 2023. Because the topic today, like it was said before in the stream, was health. So they were having a pledging session or pledging announcement. And to be honest, it was fun at the beginning because I was just taking a few images of, well, here you can see Bill Gates or the COP president, Sultan Al-Jaber on the left-hand side. And it was interesting to listening to Bill Gates delivering his notes. And it was the first time I met Bill Gates. So I did not really listen too much because I was focused on getting the photos sharp and from different angles. But I just checked online, and you can actually watch the pledging session online. I might listen to it once again because I was just so focused on Bill Gates that I did not really pay much attention to anything else, just to take some good photos. But then I start to listen. I believe this is the president of Tanzania. And this is a minister of development for United Arab Emirates. And then I started to listen to those speeches, and it was most of the time the same. We are announcing this amount of money for this fund, and we need to do more. And there were maybe 20 or 25 speakers like that. Each of them had only 2 or 3 minutes. But after a while, I just gave up, took a few more images, and went elsewhere. But they were discussing the neglected tropical diseases, and then also moved to polio, which I already heard in this stream today. So they were showcasing that there are only 2 polio-free countries in the world that still have polio, which would be Afghanistan and Pakistan. And they were mostly talking about Pakistan, that they are making huge steps ahead. And Pakistan might become a polio-free country as well in the near future. Now, this is I believe, the last image of the day when Bill Gates gave me a look and a smile. So thank you, Bill. I'll see you next time. And with that being said, I'm turning it back to you, Rock.
Well, if you foster any connections with Bill Gates, do let me know. I've got a couple grant projects that We could probably get him funded.
Michael,
It,
are you still there?
Yes, I'm here.
I had a question. Now that artistic show, that light show you described, did it include? Was it simply artistic, or did it include climate themes, water themes integrated into the show?
It was both. It was very artistic, but also it included the climate-related topics. It was mostly related to diseases, fighting polio, and it was about also rainforest and clean water.
Do you feel
Michael,
that
this
this is a
was
sort of?
sorry.
Go ahead.
No, I was just about to say this. We cannot be everywhere at once. There is so much going on here in the green zone, in the blue zone, in 90 different buildings and events. And it is just extraordinary to see this event through your camera lens. To somebody who has boots on the ground, it really enriches my experience. I'm sure John's experience, and absolutely fabulous, Mike. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. Thank you. As
Michael
I
has
said,
done.
I have another 500 images taken today, but I think unfortunately this whole stream cannot be just about photography. I would like that, but that's not the case.
You know, we had
An
done
image speaks a thousand
water
words.
projects. Exactly. We had done water projects through Rotary International in Central Asia, Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan and Afghanistan. And we had trouble communicating it to people. But when Michael did a photo montage of the project and the people and the landscape, Rotary International magazine picked it up and published it internationally in, I think, about 12 different language versions of their monthly magazine. It was quite impressive. That's why I was asking about the light show. As Michael's work demonstrates, imagery does motivate people. Michael, do you feel like that imagery that you saw, if tailored even more towards the climate message, would that be effective in sharing with the general public in various venues to help them get on the right side of this issue and maybe be more sensitive and favoring candidates who are more activists on the climate issue?
Well, definitely yes, because like Dana said, that an image is worth of 1,000 words, and I have seen some very nice exhibitions here, and also some photos and some other art around, and it tells the story. But in this specific case, because it was in this auditorium and it had a great Dolby sound and almost 3D, and it was coming from all sides. And wherever you look, you saw it was just kind of falling on you. You were immersed. You were right in there. At once, for a second or for 10 seconds, you were in rainforest, and then you were moved to Alaska, to beautiful mountains, and it was just very immersive experience.
I think to communicate the real urgency of this existential problem we're facing, it takes more than communicating facts and giving information. And I think it takes a village of all kinds of artists, writers, narratives, music, poetry, and photography. I was at a recitation of poetry and music today about resilience, which was able to reach young people in a way that just throwing out the facts of, 1.5 and so many megatons of carbon cannot touch people directly in the same way. It takes this ability to touch the human spirit in other mediums.
Well, perhaps as Democrats, with a mandate to get our candidates elected so they can effectively address this issue, maybe the take-home message, one of the most important take-home messages from this COP, is the importance of art and different media communications methods as a form of campaigning, not just our traditional campaign methods, but exploring these new avenues and these new methodologies.
think that's really important. And we are here to support not just Democratic candidates, but Democratic candidates who are really willing to push the envelope and making sure we achieve our climate objectives. I'd like to remind everybody, I'm from Democrats Abroad. John is the president of the Florida Environmental Caucus. And we are looking forward to 2024 and making sure that every last Democrat, every last person is out there voting up and down the ballot, because all this progress that we're making, it will stop with the Republican administration. So make sure, if you're listening from abroad, make sure when January rolls around that you request your ballot as soon as possible. Help us help the world. Help America lead the world by voting Democrat.
Rock, maybe while we're speaking on some of the sessions, you could dig up that photograph that we compiled, we composed there in Madrid regarding presidential leadership transitions. I thought that was a very good communication tool, political communication tool. Maybe you could find that and bring it up on the screen at some point. But time permitting, I'm happy to start discussing some of the sessions that I attended. Perhaps Dana, you attended some additional sessions that you'd want to talk about.
Go ahead, John.
All right. Well, I started out by heading over to the Uzbekistan pavilion. They had invited me to come back after a very pleasant visit yesterday. So I went there and heard their Minister of the Environment speak and a number of other speakers. And I went from that pavilion over to the Azerbaijani pavilion, and then the Tajikistan pavilion, and then the Central Asian pavilion that represented a number of nations, about 5 nations in Central Asia, all the stands. And they were almost all giving the same presentation. They all had the same priority. And it speaks to what we as agricultural engineers, as agricultural scientists back in the early 1980s anticipated would transpire as the climate crisis grew worse and worse over the decades. What they were talking about primarily was how climate was affecting them most directly through water. Too much water, too little water, and combined with uncertainties and with higher temperatures. And the primary effect on this, on their nations, the peoples of their nations, was to put a serious dent in their food production. It greatly diminished their productivity. As a result, they were all experiencing migration, significant migration within their nation, not from nation to nation, but from the rural areas into the urban areas. And you may recall from 2011, 2012, when Syria melted down, that was preceded by a drought in Turkey, or in Syria, that extended into Turkey as well. But the Syrian farmers were so devastated by this drought that they moved in large numbers into the cities. Then they became discontent. Then the government reacted harshly. Then the entire nation melted down. And these Central Asian nations are looking over at that example, feeling that same pressure, knowing that their populations are moving around as a result of the climate crisis, as a result of its impacts upon water and food production, as well as creating unstable soils and creating landslides. In many of their mountainous areas, they have permafrosts, and as those thaw, that land becomes unstable. So they talked about how they're having a crisis in being able to even monitor this. They have a shortage of trained young people, personnel, professionals, young professionals coming into like the hydrometeorology ministries and office, and they're being able to retain this talent that often gets attracted away to other nations. And they're facing significant challenges, not just dealing with the migration, but just trying to collect data on the problem. So this was a theme among many nations. And it's exactly what we anticipated back in the early 80s would constitute the onset of a severe climate crisis. And then I went over to the Cameroonian exhibition pavilion. And it was their first time having a pavilion at COP. Cameroon is a Central West African nation. In fact, I taught there at an agricultural university in the 1980s. And it was very interesting to talk to some of those people, the young people that from their ministry of the environment who were representing their nation. So I enjoyed that visit and then came over here to Rotary and participated in it was supposed to be a panel discussion, but because there were 4 or 5 panelists and there were about 6 or 7 audience members, they simply had us create a circle and it became a round table. So I enjoyed interacting with them. It was very informative. Rotary is an important civic organization in the United States. If you can transform the attitudes of Rotary, you can transform many American communities, including the political outcomes in those communities. So it's great seeing Rotary beginning to address this. However, the United States wasn't heavily represented. This panel was led by Swiss Rotarians and attended by many other nationalities. I think I was one of only 2 Americans in this particular roundtable. The person who had organized the pavilion and the roundtable is the Rotary International Arab League director. Also attending was a managing director from the World Economic Forum, and then a director from the Institute of Economics and Conflict, demonstrating how instability driven by food and water can have an impact on destabilizing a society and leading to conflict. And then a former New Zealand ambassador to the UN was also participating. And then interestingly, also the other American was a farmer, a Florida farmer from Palatka, Hastings area, where I've done some work many years ago. So I'm looking forward to her presentation tomorrow at 3 p.m. I'll be attending that. But they talked about how the business is driven by profit and how do they overcome that issue. They talked about subsidies. They talked about compliance. And they talked, in other words, nations imposing regulations upon the corporations that they had to adhere to in order to maintain their business status. And then about branding. Many companies feel it's necessary to demonstrate their green credentials. And then that led to a discussion on my part about ecological economics and making sure that that branding accurately reflected the realities of the companies and their products. So we had a very good conversation on that, and I enjoyed it very much, made some excellent contacts, and met a young man named Peter Pham. And Peter is a Democratic activist from California. And professionally, he's here at COP orienting and training young people who belong to the delegations of many nations. Many of the nations allocate, of course, appoint senior representatives to their delegations to engage in the negotiations. But they all appoint a significant number of young people, in effect as proteges, and to give them experience in this arena. So his responsibility is to help those young people figure out which end is up, how they can effectively engage in the UN process, and help them be more effective overall in their professional development. Now, since he's a Democratic activist and involved in COP, I think he'll make an excellent interview, and we'll have him featured in the coming days.
Wonderful. Dana, what sessions have you been attending?
Quite a few really inspiring and interesting sessions. A lot of them, as I said, do focus on the intersection of climate and health. One very interesting, I'm trying to remember, maybe it was in the food systems lab, because what we eat, what the food that we are able to produce and the system that enables it will have an extraordinary impact on health going forward as we face the climate crisis. And there was a young woman there that really struck me that's working with the European Union. She couldn't have been over 20 years old. And she spoke about the youth movement and how the youth of today are larger than they've ever been on planet Earth. and they are also the most connected, both virtually and within their communities. And there's no way that we can solve the problems that we're facing without the youth being a real partner and decision-making agents in that process. And most of these organizations, most of the people you see around here are people with more experience that are older, and they have, like a little delegate here, a youth delegate there, but that really the young people have to be brought up and fully integrated into the decisions that are being made that are going to impact their future. So she was quite an inspiration, and I have been looking for young people as I've been around here today. Another session that I attended was a young man who is German, and he is studying at Harvard. He's become a well-known youth climate activist. He will be personally interviewing Al Gore tomorrow in a closed session, but he's also a musician and a poet. He performed with the Resilience Hub. Many of you might know it. It's an excellent platform virtual platform where you can follow this conference. And he did a music and poetry recitation on resilience, and the resilience, what it will take to overcome this existential challenge that we're facing. Several other sessions that I attended had to do with financing health in the global South, in countries where many of us are living. In the global North, it's the governments that take care of the health, but in the global South, it's really investments and finance from the World Bank, Asian Development Bank, African Development Bank, that Bill Gates Foundation, that need to be partners in helping the global South, helping the more vulnerable communities somehow become resilient and manage to adapt to this climate crisis. Also of interest was this session that I attended with Petri Tallas, who is the chairman of the World Meteorological Organization. He also happens to be Finnish, and it was on climate early warning systems for climate disasters, as I mentioned earlier, whether it's fires or storms, hurricanes, because warning the population with the kind of technological systems in place, there are technologies being produced by Google, by Finland, by various actors and partners around the world that can get these warning systems in places in the Pacific Islands, in places that are fire prone, in places that are hurricane prone, so that life can be saved. Making climate in this intersection of climate and environment today with health means that it's putting human beings at the center of that conversation. We're not just saving the planet. We need to save the human beings on the planet and to protect the health of those human beings. And I think that was the central, most important point that this day represented, for the first time being presented at a COP, that we need to really focus on people as well, and the health and prosperity and survival of the human race on this planet.
Very aptly said. Thank you very much, Dana. As a reminder, if anybody has any questions, please throw them in the chat. We will get to them as soon as possible. But now we're coming towards the end of our segment here today. And if anybody would have some last closing thoughts here, now's the time. We'll start with you, John. Do you have any closing thoughts today as we finish and wrap up our day 4?
Well, it's been a very busy day, and today was really the first day we had our feet solidly on the ground, and we're able to navigate this venue and get to many of the sessions that we knew were going on and providing excellent material. We're just pleased that things are going smoothly now, and we're able to capture the information and deliver the message back home.
Yeah, very, very aptly said, John. Dana, any last closing thoughts here?
Well, this is only day 2 here for me, so I am still getting my sea legs, but finding my way around. There's so much on offer here, and it is a bit overwhelming. But I'm looking forward to the programs going forward, and I want to remind folks that are listening tonight that we will be broadcasting live from a Democrats Abroad event where we're welcoming Americans to convene on client at another venue here in Dubai. So folks from Democrats Abroad, UAE, and Americans flying in from all over the world will be joining us, and we'll be just meeting a few of those people and discussing with them why they're here, what they're up to. It should be an interesting session for tomorrow. Looking forward to it.
I couldn't agree more. So thank you very much, everybody who's joined us here today. Whether or not you're viewing us from any of our live stream platforms or Zoom, we're very glad to have each and every one of you along with us for this wonderful journey. Whether you're in Dubai or in the US, we hope that our program has been educational, also does the same job of rousing our Democrats and to really get out the vote to showcase that this is what we do. We do support the science, we do support the scientists, and we will be continuing to showcase you our coverage of COP28 in Dubai over the next couple of weeks. Please feel free to keep tuning in every single day. Feel free to email in any questions or throw them into the chat box, and we'll definitely be glad to address them as time goes on. With that, we are signing off for day 4 of our coverage of COP28 in Dubai. Until next time, folks, I'll see you later.